Sarah Martinez had always been different from other soldiers in the 82nd Airborne Division. While her fellow soldiers spent their free time playing cards or talking about home, she could be found at the shooting range, methodically adjusting her scope and calculating wind patterns. Her small frame and quiet demeanor made her an easy target for jokes among the predominantly male battalion. "Look at Martinez again," Sergeant Johnson would say, watching her take notes in a small leather journal after each practice session, writing love letters to her rifle. The other soldiers would laugh, not understanding that Sarah was recording wind speeds, temperature changes, and bullet drop calculations. To them, her precision seemed obsessive, even unnecessary. The mockery intensified during training exercises. When Sarah would take extra time to set up her shot, carefully adjusting her position and checking her equipment, her squad mates would roll their eyes. "We could have completed the mission twice by now," Corporal Williams often complained. "This isn't a science experiment, Martinez." What her fellow soldiers didn't know was that Sarah had grown up on a ranch in Montana, where missing a shot meant the difference between dinner and going hungry. Her father, a former Marine sniper, had taught her that every shot mattered. "Patience and precision," he would say, "are worth more than speed and luck." Those words echoed in her mind every time she heard the snickers from behind. During one particularly brutal training session in the desert heat of Arizona, Sarah's methodical approach became the subject of open ridicule. The battalion was practicing rapid deployment scenarios, and Sarah's deliberate pace stood out like a sore thumb. "Martinez, this is combat training, not ballet class," shouted Lieutenant Rodriguez, frustrated by what he saw as unnecessary delays. The breaking point came during a live-fire exercise designed to simulate urban warfare conditions. While other soldiers quickly found cover and began engaging targets, Sarah spent precious minutes calculating angles and distances. Her first shot missed by inches, drawing groans from her observing squad mates. "Great. The perfectionist chokes. Under pressure," someone muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. But Sarah didn't give up. She adjusted her scope, recalculated the wind drift, and fired again. This time, her bullet found its mark with deadly accuracy, striking the center of a target that other soldiers had been unable to hit consistently. The mocking stopped momentarily, but by the next day, it resumed as if nothing had happened. Her commanding officers began to question whether Sarah belonged in an elite infantry unit. During performance reviews, they praised her technical skills, but expressed concerns about her ability to adapt to the fast-paced nature of modern warfare. "The enemy won't wait for you to check your calculations twice," Captain Stevens warned. During one evaluation, Sarah's confidence began to waver under the constant criticism. She started second-guessing her methods, trying to match the speed of her colleagues instead of playing to her strengths. This only made things worse, as her rushed shots lacked the precision that had always been her trademark. The other soldiers noticed this decline and used it as further proof that her careful approach was flawed. The situation reached its lowest point during a training competition between different squads. Sarah's team was depending on her sniper skills to win a crucial scenario, but the pressure to perform quickly caused her to make several uncharacteristic errors. Her squad finished last, and the disappointment on her teammates' faces was crushing. That night, alone in her barracks, Sarah called her father. Through tears, she explained how her fellow soldiers viewed her methods as a weakness rather than a strength. Her father listened patiently before responding with the wisdom that had guided her since childhood. "Sarah, there will come a day when your precision saves lives. Don't let others convince you to abandon what makes you exceptional." His words provided some comfort, but Sarah still faced the daily challenge of proving herself in an environment that seemed to value speed over accuracy. She continued her meticulous practice routine, even as the mockery persisted. Deep down, she believed that her father's prediction would someday prove true, though she had no idea how dramatically that moment would arrive. 6 months after the humiliating training competition, Sarah's battalion received deployment orders to Afghanistan. The news brought a mixture of excitement and anxiety to the base. For many soldiers, this would be their first combat deployment, and the reality of war suddenly felt very real. Sarah saw this as her chance to prove that her methodical approach had value beyond the controlled environment of training exercises. The flight to Bagram airfield was long and uncomfortable, with soldiers crammed into military transport planes for over 14 hours. During the journey, Sarah noticed how her squad mates had grown quieter, more serious. The joking and mockery that had defined their interactions during training gave way to nervous conversations about what they might face in combat. Upon arrival, at Forward Operating Base Chapman in eastern Afghanistan, the battalion was briefed on their mission. They would be conducting counterinsurgency operations in a region known for Taliban activity, focusing on protecting supply routes and supporting local Afghan forces. The mountainous terrain and extreme distances involved in their operations would require specialized skills, though nobody seemed to connect this to Sarah's expertise yet. The first few weeks were relatively quiet, involving routine patrols and establishing security checkpoints. Sarah carried her M24 sniper weapon system, a rifle she had customized and practiced with for hundreds of hours. While other soldiers seemed eager for action, Sarah used this quiet period to study the local geography, wind patterns, and terrain features through her scope. She filled several pages in her journal with detailed observations about potential shooting positions and range estimates. "Still playing Scientist, Martinez?" Sergeant Johnson asked one day, watching her calculate the ballistic trajectory for shots across the valley where they were stationed. "This isn't the shooting range back home." Sarah simply nodded and continued her work, knowing that understanding the environment could mean the difference between life and death. The battalion's first real engagement came during a routine convoy escort mission. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in the hills overlooking a narrow mountain pass, ambushing vehicles with rocket-propelled grenades and automatic weapons fire. The attack was swift and coordinated, catching the American forces in a deadly crossfire. Sarah's squad was part of the reaction force sent to neutralize the threat. As they approached the ambush site, she could see muzzle flashes from enemy positions nearly 2 miles away in the rocky hills. The other soldiers began engaging with their standard-issue weapons, but the distance made their shots ineffective. The enemy fighters seemed safely out of range, continuing their assault on the trapped convoy below. Lieutenant Rodriguez quickly assessed the situation and realized they needed to eliminate the distant threats to save the convoy. He turned to Sarah, remembering her sniper training, though he remained skeptical about her abilities under real combat conditions. "Martinez, think you can reach those positions from here?" he asked, pointing toward the hills where enemy fire was originating. Sarah immediately began her familiar routine, setting up her rifle and pulling out her rangefinder to calculate the exact distance to target. Through her scope, she could see individual fighters moving between rock formations, appearing as small figures against the mountainside. The distance was extreme even for a trained sniper, and the wind conditions were challenging due to the valley's unique geography. "Come on, Martinez, we don't have all day," Corporal Williams urged as explosions continued to rock the convoy below. Sarah ignored the pressure and continued her calculations, adjusting for altitude, temperature, and the swirling winds that were common in these mountain passes. Her squad mates watched impatiently as she made minute adjustments to her scope and checked her calculations twice. To them, it seemed like the same unnecessary perfectionism they had witnessed during training, except now lives were hanging in the balance. Some began to doubt whether she would be able to perform under the stress of actual combat. The enemy fire intensified, and it became clear that time was running out for the trapped convoy. Several vehicles were already burning, and radio reports indicated casualties among the soldiers caught in the kill zone. The pressure mounted on Sarah to take her shots quickly, but she knew that rushing would only result in missed opportunities and potentially more American casualties. Finally, after what felt like an eternity to her anxious squad mates, Sarah settled into her firing position and placed her finger on the trigger. The first shot would determine whether months of mockery and doubt were justified, or if her careful, methodical approach would finally prove its worth when it mattered most. Sarah's finger squeezed the trigger with the same deliberate pressure she had practiced thousands of times. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the sound of the shot echoed across the valley. Through her scope, she watched as the bullet traveled its long arc through the mountain air, fighting against wind and gravity over a distance that seemed impossible to bridge. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. The enemy fighters continued their assault on the convoy below. seemingly unaware that death was racing toward them at over 2,800 feet per second. Sarah's squad mates watched anxiously, some already preparing to suggest alternative tactics if her shot failed to find its mark. Then suddenly one of the muzzle flashes in the distant hills went silent. Sarah had struck her target with perfect precision, eliminating an enemy fighter from a distance that would later be measured at exactly 3.2 miles. The achievement was so extraordinary that initially, none of her fellow soldiers realized what had happened. "Did you see that?" whispered Private Jackson, peering through his binoculars at the enemy position. "One of them just dropped." Lieutenant Rodriguez quickly focused his own optics on the location, confirming that one of the enemy firing positions had indeed gone quiet. The realization slowly dawned on the entire squad that Sarah had successfully engaged a target at an almost impossible range, but there was no time for celebration. Several other enemy fighters continued their attack from different positions along the ridgeline. Sarah had already shifted her aim to the next target, her rifle steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The calculations for the second shot were different due to a slight change in wind direction and the new target's position behind a different type of cover. Her second shot rang out just minutes after the first, and again the squad watched in amazement as another distant muzzle flash disappeared. The enemy fighter had been struck while moving between rock formations, a shot that required Sarah to predict his movement and timing perfectly. The mathematical precision of her marksmanship was becoming impossible to ignore. Word of the incredible shots quickly spread across the radio network. Other units in the area had been monitoring the ambush situation, and news that someone was successfully engaging targets at extreme range provided hope for the trapped convoy. Battalion headquarters requested confirmation of the distances involved, initially refusing to believe that any sniper could be effective at such ranges. Sarah continued her methodical work, identifying and eliminating enemy positions one by one. Each shot required fresh calculations as conditions changed throughout the engagement. Wind speeds varied at different altitudes between her position and the targets. Temperature fluctuations affected bullet velocity, and the angle of her shots changed as she engaged fighters at different elevations along the ridgeline. The surviving enemy fighters began to realize they were being picked off by an unseen sniper from an impossible distance. Their disciplined attack started to break down as they sought better cover and tried to identify the source of the deadly accurate fire. Several attempted to retreat deeper into the mountains, but Sarah's scope could track their movement across the rocky terrain. By the time the engagement ended, Sarah had fired 11 shots and achieved 9 confirmed kills at ranges that exceeded anything in her unit's training manuals. The convoy was saved, and the enemy ambush was completely neutralized without requiring a dangerous ground assault that could have cost American lives. The impossible had become reality through sheer skill and preparation. As the immediate danger passed, Sarah's squad mates gathered around her with expressions of disbelief and newfound respect. Sergeant Johnson, who had been among her harshest critics during training, stared at her rifle as if it were some kind of magical weapon. "How in the hell did you make those shots?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine awe. Sarah began explaining her calculations and the environmental factors she had accounted for, but the technical details seemed almost incomprehensible to soldiers who had never considered the complex mathematics involved in extreme-range shooting. What they understood was that her obsessive attention to detail had saved American lives and accomplished something that seemed impossible. Lieutenant Rodriguez immediately contacted battalion headquarters to report the successful resolution of the ambush. His initial report was met with skepticism until other units confirmed that the enemy positions had indeed been neutralized by sniper fire from their location. The distance measurements were verified multiple times, eventually confirming that Sarah had achieved one of the longest confirmed sniper kills in military history. News of the remarkable achievement spread quickly through the military communications network. Sarah's methodical approach, which had been ridiculed as unnecessary perfectionism, was suddenly recognized as the exact type of precision required for the most challenging combat situations. The soldier, who had been mocked for her careful preparation, had just demonstrated why that preparation mattered. Word of Sarah's incredible marksmanship spread through the military chain of command like wildfire. Within hours of the engagement, Officers from multiple levels of command were requesting detailed reports about the shots that had saved the convoy. The initial skepticism gave way to amazement, as ballistics experts confirmed the mathematical precision required for such extreme-range engagements. Colonel Harrison, the battalion commander, personally visited Sarah's forward position the following day. He had served in combat for over 20 years and had never witnessed anything comparable to what she had accomplished. Standing beside her on the rocky outcrop where she had taken her shots, he peered through high-powered binoculars at the distant ridgeline where enemy fighters had been positioned. "Martinez, I owe you an apology," the colonel said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine respect. "Your methods may seem unconventional, but results speak louder than opinions." He informed her that headquarters was recommending her for commendation, and that her techniques would be studied by military instructors to improve training programs for future snipers. The transformation in how her fellow soldiers treated Sarah was immediate and dramatic. Sergeant Johnson, who had been her most vocal critic, now approached her with questions about wind reading and ballistic calculations. "Could you teach me some of that math stuff you do?" he asked, genuinely curious about the science behind her success. Other soldiers began seeking her advice about their own shooting techniques, and Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being consulted as an expert rather than mocked as an oddity. The same methodical approach that had once made her an outsider now made her one of the most valuable members of the battalion. Military journalists arrived to document her story, and Sarah's achievement began attracting attention beyond her immediate unit. The tale of a young soldier whose precision had saved an entire convoy resonated with people back home, especially her father, who received calls from neighbors who had seen news reports about his daughter's remarkable accomplishment. However, Sarah's newfound recognition came with increased responsibility and pressure. Intelligence reports indicated that Taliban forces in the region were actively seeking information about the American sniper who had disrupted their ambush. Enemy fighters began changing their tactics, operating at greater distances and using different approaches to avoid her deadly accurate fire. The psychological impact on enemy forces was significant. Knowing that an American sniper could engage targets at extreme ranges forced Taliban fighters to reconsider their attack strategies. Some abandoned positions that they had previously considered safe, while others began operating only during weather conditions that would impair visibility and accuracy. Sarah's success also attracted the attention of special operations commanders, who were interested in incorporating her techniques into more specialized missions. She received requests to support high-value target operations that required precision shooting capabilities beyond what standard infantry snipers could provide. The pressure of her new reputation weighed heavily on Sarah's mind. Every mission now carried the expectation that she would perform at the same extraordinary level that had made her famous. The margin for error seemed to disappear, and she found herself double-checking calculations that she would have trusted instinctively before her moment of recognition. During quiet moments between operations, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed. The same soldiers who had once questioned her methods now hung on her every word about shooting techniques. The officers who had criticized her careful approach now praised her attention to detail as a model for other soldiers to follow. Despite the positive changes in how others viewed her, Sarah remained focused on the mission rather than the acclaim. She continued her methodical practice routines and detailed environmental observations, knowing that lives depended on her ability to perform under pressure. The praise was gratifying, but the responsibility of living up to her reputation was daunting. New challenges emerged as enemy forces adapted to the threat she represented. Intelligence reports suggested that bounties had been placed on American snipers, with Sarah specifically identified as a high-value target. Taliban commanders were reportedly offering significant rewards for information about her location and movements. The recognition Sarah had earned through her precision shooting was now making her a target herself. The very skills that had saved American lives were also putting her in greater danger, as enemy forces recognized the threat she posed to their operations. Her journey from mockery to respect had taken an unexpected turn toward becoming one of the most hunted soldiers in her area of operations. As Sarah prepared for her next mission, she understood that the stakes had been raised considerably. The ISO Battalion was depending on her skills more than ever, but the enemy was also more determined than ever to eliminate the threat she represented. Her precision had protected her fellow soldiers, but now that same precision had made her the primary target. 3 weeks after Sarah's legendary shot saved the convoy, intelligence reports revealed a disturbing development. Taliban forces were planning a coordinated attack on Forward Operating Base Chapman, with the specific goal of eliminating the American sniper who had been disrupting their operations. Sarah's reputation had made her a marked woman, and enemy commanders were willing to commit significant resources to remove her from the battlefield. The planned attack was unlike anything the battalion had faced before. Instead of hit-and-run tactics, the Taliban were preparing a sustained assault involving multiple groups attacking from different directions simultaneously. Their strategy was designed to overwhelm the base's defenses and create enough chaos to penetrate the perimeter where Sarah was believed to be stationed. Colonel Harrison called an emergency briefing to address the intelligence reports. The room was filled with tension as officers discussed defensive strategies and evacuation plans. Some suggested relocating Sarah to a more secure position, but she insisted on remaining with her unit, knowing that her skills would be crucial in defending the base. "They're coming for me," Sarah told the assembled officers, her voice steady, despite the gravity of the situation. "But if we position ourselves correctly, we can use their focus on finding me as an advantage. They'll expose themselves trying to get to me, and that's when I can protect everyone else." The defense plan that emerged from the briefing was built around Sarah's capabilities. Multiple observation posts were established around the base perimeter, with Sarah positioned at the location, offering the best fields of fire across the likely approach routes. Her fellow soldiers, who had once mocked her precision, now understood that their lives might depend on her ability to engage multiple targets at extreme ranges. On the morning of the attack, Sarah was in position before dawn, her rifle zeroed, and her calculations complete. She had spent the previous night studying weather forecasts and updating her range cards for every possible shooting position around the base. The methodical preparation that had once drawn ridicule was now recognized as professional excellence. The attack began with mortar fire, intended to suppress the base's defensive positions and create confusion. Taliban fighters approached from 3 different directions, moving in coordinated waves designed to overwhelm the American defenders. Through her scope, Sarah could see muzzle flashes and movement across the valley as enemy forces advanced under cover of darkness. The first challenge came from a group of fighters attempting to establish a heavy machine gun position on a ridge, approximately 2 miles from the base. Their plan was to provide covering fire for other attackers, but they had positioned themselves within Sarah's effective range. Her first shot of the engagement eliminated the machine gunner, and her second shot disabled their weapon before they could begin suppressing fire. As dawn broke, the full scope of the attack became visible. Sarah counted at least 60 enemy fighters advancing from multiple directions, with some groups carrying rocket-propelled grenades and others preparing to breach the base's perimeter defenses. The assault was larger and more organized than any previous attack on their position. From her elevated position, Sarah could see the entire battlefield and coordinate with other defensive positions through radio communications. She began systematically engaging the most dangerous threats first, prioritizing targets carrying heavy weapons or those attempting to direct the attack through hand signals and radio communications. Each shot required split-second calculations, as targets moved across varied terrain at different distances. The environmental conditions were challenging, with shifting winds and varying light conditions as the sun rose over the mountains. Sarah's years of practice and her meticulous approach to precision shooting were being tested under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. The enemy fighters quickly realized they were being engaged by the legendary sniper they had come to eliminate. Instead of discouraging them, this seemed to intensify their determination to reach her position. Several groups began advancing directly toward her observation post, willing to accept heavy casualties for the chance to neutralize the threat she represented. Sarah's radio crackled with reports from other defensive positions as the battle intensified. Enemy fighters were probing multiple sections of the perimeter, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. The coordination and persistence of the attack demonstrated that significant planning had gone into this assault, with Sarah as the primary objective. As the morning progressed, Sarah's ammunition supply began to run low. Each shot had to count more than ever, and she found herself making increasingly difficult targeting decisions. The pressure was immense, knowing that every enemy fighter she failed to stop could potentially reach her fellow soldiers' positions. The ultimate test of Sarah's skills was approaching as enemy forces closed the distance to the base perimeter. Her precision shooting had disrupted their initial assault, but now the battle would be decided by her ability to protect the entire battalion when the enemy was closest and most dangerous. As Taliban fighters closed within a few hundred yards of the base perimeter, Sarah faced the most critical moments of the battle. Her elevated position gave her a clear view of enemy forces attempting to breach the defensive wire, but it also made her location increasingly obvious to the attackers. Several enemy fighters were now specifically targeting her position with rocket-propelled grenades and concentrated automatic weapons fire. The intensity of incoming fire forced Sarah to move between different shooting positions, carrying her rifle and equipment while under direct attack. Each new position required rapid range calculations and scope adjustments, skills that her months of methodical practice had made automatic even under extreme stress. The precision that had once been mocked was now the foundation of the base's defense. From her new position, Sarah could see a group of enemy fighters preparing to assault the main gate with explosives. The attack was coordinated with diversionary fire from other directions, designed to overwhelm the defender's ability to respond effectively. She had perhaps 30 seconds to prevent the breach that would allow dozens of enemy fighters to pour into the base compound. Her shot struck the lead fighter just as he was preparing to place the explosive charge. The second fighter, seeing his companion fall, hesitated for a crucial moment that allowed Sarah to chamber another round and engage him as well. The explosive device remained unused, and the planned breach was prevented by her split-second timing and absolute accuracy. Radio communications from other defensive positions reported that enemy attacks were faltering across the entire perimeter. Sarah's systematic elimination of key targets had disrupted the coordination of the assault, forcing Taliban fighters to operate independently rather than as organized units. The careful planning that had gone into the attack was being unraveled by one soldier's precision. Colonel Harrison's voice came through Sarah's radio headset, providing real-time intelligence about enemy movements and requesting specific target engagement. "Martinez, we've got a group trying to flank from the northeast. Can you reach them from your position?" Sarah adjusted her scope and confirmed that the targets were within her effective range, despite the extreme distance and challenging angle. Her shots across the northeastern approach eliminated the flanking attempt, but the effort required her to expose herself to return fire from other enemy positions. Bullets struck the rocks around her position, sending stone fragments flying and forcing her to seek better cover while maintaining her ability to engage targets across the valley. The battle entered its fourth hour. Ammunition supplies throughout the base were running critically low. Sarah was down to her final magazine, each remaining round precious beyond calculation. Every shot had to achieve maximum effect, preferably eliminating multiple threats or disrupting entire groups of attackers rather than engaging individual targets. The psychological impact of her sustained accurate fire was becoming evident in enemy behavior. Taliban fighters were showing increasing reluctance to advance across open ground, knowing that exposure meant almost certain death from the invisible sniper who seemed able to reach any position they attempted to occupy. The legendary reputation that had made her a target was now protecting her fellow soldiers. With only a few rounds remaining, Sarah faced a final group of enemy fighters who had managed to approach within assault distance of the base's communications center. Destroying the radio equipment would isolate the base from outside support and potentially allow follow-up attacks to succeed where this assault had failed. Her final shots of the engagement were her most challenging, requiring her to engage multiple, moving targets in rapid succession while accounting for their different ranges and movement patterns. The mathematical calculations that had once drawn mockery now unfolded in her mind with lightning speed, each adjustment automatic and precise. The last enemy fighter fell just 50 yards from the communications antenna, ending the most sustained attack forward operating base Chapman had ever faced. As silence settled over the battlefield, Sarah's fellow soldiers began to emerge from their defensive positions, amazed that they had survived such an intense assault with minimal casualties. The aftermath of the battle revealed the full scope of what Sarah had accomplished. 43 enemy fighters had been eliminated, with 31 confirmed as direct results of her sniper fire. The coordinated assault that was intended to overrun the base and eliminate her had instead been turned into a devastating defeat for Taliban forces in the region. Military investigators who arrived to document the engagement found evidence of the extraordinary precision Sarah had demonstrated throughout the battle. Shot patterns and target analysis confirmed that she had achieved accuracy rates that exceeded anything in military training manuals, even under the most challenging combat conditions imaginable. The soldier who had once been mocked for her careful approach to marksmanship had saved not just individual lives, but protected an entire battalion from being overrun by determined enemy forces. Her precision had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible, transforming her from an object of ridicule into a legitimate hero whose methods would be studied and emulated for years to come. Sarah's father received a phone call from Colonel Harrison, personally informing him of his daughter's extraordinary courage and skill. "Sir, your daughter is the finest soldier I've ever had the privilege to command," the colonel said. "Her precision saved every life on this base today." The mockery had ended forever, replaced by respect, gratitude, and recognition that true precision under pressure was not just a skill, but a form of courage that few soldiers could ever hope to achieve.